Welcome, friends. Pour your favorite cup of tea, coffee, or cocoa and settle in for Sips from the Sip from the Utica Institute Museum. Sips from the Sip is all about sharing the knowledge of little-known people and places in Mississippi. We're serving up truth, justice, with a dollop of sass. I'm your host, Jean Green. Today's episode is the 38th of a multi-part series of readings and discussions from the book, Black Man's Burden. Joining me today to discuss Chapter 19 is Jasmine Cannon. Jasmine is a documentary filmmaker from Alabama and a history buff. Thank you for joining us for Sips from the Sip. This is our discussion of Chapter 19, and joining me to discuss that is Jasmine Cannon. Jasmine is a young woman I met a couple of years ago when she came to Utica, and she is an Alabama native. She's a documentary filmmaker and all-around Renaissance woman. Thank you, Jasmine, for agreeing to meet with me and discuss Chapter 19 today.
Of course, Ms. Green. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invite to, converse about this final chapter in the book. If I'm being honest, it really is a dream come true. I think I told you that when you called me.
Yeah.
But, I listened to the podcast and, ever since I read the book when I first came to Utica back in 2022, Carlton Turner actually gave me the book. And, I resonated with it so much because Holtzclaw is from Alabama and he found, this purpose, if you will, in Utica. And I feel our lives kind of, even though we're 100 years apart, our lives are kind of similar in that way. So it means a lot to me to be able to, come in and speak with you about Holtzclaw and the book and all of the things we're going to talk about today. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. My pleasure. I've been talking with other people about the individual chapters that we have. And I've been looking forward to discussing this one in particular because it's sort of where Holtzclaw wraps up what he has been discussing in this book. And some of the other chapters have hit a spark with me, but I really wanted to talk to someone who was younger, who is more grounded in the now, in the present, and see how this work that was written in 1915, how this book resonates with young folks today, or how it could. So I think the first thing I want to do is sort of get your impressions of the book, and then we can get into what's going on in Chapter 19.
Okay. So when I read the book, I read not knowing anything about Holtzclaw, not knowing, if I'm being honest, even though I'm from Alabama, I didn't know, and I know of Tuskegee University, I didn't know anything about the Little Tuskegees, which Utica Industrial Normal Institute was technically a quote unquote a Little Tuskegee. So I feel like when I first read the book, my world was opened, I just learned so much about, and it makes a difference, Ms. Green, I think, because when you can identify with people, like him being a Black person, him being from the South, him being a person with dreams bigger than his current situation, those are things that resonated the most with me. And I think those things are what I took, the most from the book. And that's why I appreciate the book so much, because of Holtzclaw and his vision for himself and his vision for a better world, So I just appreciated learning about Holtzclaw's life, but then also seeing the impacts that he had on other people's lives, and then learning more about the general history, about the Little Tuskegees, about Utica. And then we're reading and learning about all of this stuff while we're also living and learning about our own lives. So it's interesting to see, I guess, the juxtaposition between what he was going through back then versus what we may be going through today. Yeah, and of course, I also had to read it for research purposes as I'm working on the documentary about Utica too. So
tell us a little bit about the documentary before we get into discussion. Sort of a shameless plug of what you're doing.
I wasn't trying to plug it, but I was trying to be honest in my answer about my initial impressions of the book and why I got into it in the first place. Well, I came to Utica back in November 2022 as an artist in residence at Sip Culture. And so I came for a different project, but I started observing a lot of the agricultural work they were doing. And so, like, honestly, that was, I guess, the beginning of the documentary. So, like, long story short, like, I read The Black Man's Burden and I learned, like, oh, this isn't new. Utica Knights have always tried to be self-sufficient and provide for themselves. And it all started really with the William Henry Holtzclaw. That just blew my mind, quite honestly. So, and Utica has changed so much, like, since then, in good ways and probably in not so good ways. And so the documentary initially was primarily focused on agriculture, food access, food insecurity. But as I've learned so much more about Utica, it's going to be all of those things, but also about, rural communities and real community revitalization, self-sufficiency, trying to tell a full story of Utica. But, like, with the foundation being about, like, the agriculture and the self-sufficiency of the people of Utica, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm really excited about that. I want everyone, which is one of the purposes of this podcast, I wanted to open up the story of William Holtzclaw to a wider audience. And one of the things that I've been really excited about is the discussions of each chapter from all the different perspectives, because everybody approaches it in a different way with a different mindset. And it's been exciting to find that out. It's also been exciting to be involved with Sip Culture as they reintroduce Utica and the surrounding community and the state to the whole ideas that Holtzclaw had that he brought from Tuskegee. So it's been really satisfying to be able to present this, and hopefully it will live on past us so that it will inspire other people as well.
Right.
But,
and
yes,
it's just so interesting because, Ms. Green, I hear you say all the time, all roads lead to Utica.
Right?
Right? And it's like, it's just amazing. Even like, this is something that was talked about in chapter 19, but also like throughout the book, it's just amazing all of the things that have transpired in Utica that are exceptionally amazing, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
And like you wouldn't expect for those things to happen in this very small town in the middle of Mississippi, like even with the school being considered the premier example of what a little Tuskegee should look like, It's like nobody would expect for that to be in Utica, Mississippi. Nobody would expect for Booker T. Washington to say, that's what we need to be doing all over the place here in Utica, Mississippi. So, yes, it's just so interesting to me. It's just so interesting to me.
Well, let's look at chapter 19.
Okay.
And one of the first things he does is he talks about this article, and then he quotes almost the entire article in this chapter.
I thought it was the entire article.
It was, I think, except for one paragraph, it was the entire article. Because we dug up that article to see, how much of it he quoted.
Okay.
And it was all except maybe one paragraph.
Wow. And that was Talladega College, another HBCU in Alabama.
Yes. So William Pickens, who taught Latin at Talladega, wrote in the New York Independent in 1912 this article titled Utica. So we went out and we found that, and to compare it to this chapter. And I was like, well, my goodness, he just lifted everything except the introductory paragraph and just dropped it in. But it was so positive and important to show an outside impression of what Utica was. And he in Jackson. But I wanted to see what you thought about not just that article, but some of the points that he brought home. So if you could speak to that.
Got you. So, Ms. Green, like in that first paragraph of the book, right before we get to the article, I made a note of this quote where Holtzclaw says, like, it was his aim since he left school to pretty much, like, create this institution, right? And that just reminded me of his perseverance.
Yes.
And, like, I think we see this throughout the chapter where nothing was going to get in his way of being successful. I admire it so much because it's not only about him. It's like this selfless success
Yes.
that he desired. So yeah, one of the things that stood out to me the most about the article from Mr. Pickens as it relates to young people was the highlight of the young people. But I know we wanted to talk about like how Holtzclaw then his work impacts like, the youth today. But I'm also thinking about how his work then was impacting youth then as well.
Oh, yeah,
and then of course like the article talks about the oratorical contest.
Yes.
In Jackson, how the Utica students were just so amazing. And one of the things that stood out to me the most about that story, Miss Green, was when he identified the young girl that won. Like, nobody would expect for a little ordinary looking country black girl to like win this contest. And like, I'm a little ordinary looking like country black girl.
What you mean? What you trying to say?
Exactly. And I think that's something that like, a lot of us or some of us have to deal with today. The underestimation. Just because of where you may be from.
Yeah.
Or like what you look like.
Yeah.
Right? But big things come in small packages.
That's
like
right.
This girl showed us.
I'm gonna interrupt you just for a second when he said ordinary looking little black girl.
Country black girl.
That's right, little ordinary looking country black girl. And I got my hackles up. I'm like, what you trying to say?
Exactly.
What you mean ordinary looking country. But somebody from the rural. What does it say? Folks say in church all the time, can anything good come out of Nazareth? So, can anything good come out of the country? Well, yes, indeed it could. It produced a young woman who was so good at oration, at speaking, that she blew everybody else out of the water. Mm-hmm. So, it's not about what you look like, where you're from. It's about what you do with what you have, where you are.
Exactly. And then throughout that article, it also talks about how they were going to contests and like how the Utica students, they had the biggest pig or the biggest hog, the best animals. They were just winning all of these contests, right? And I think Holtzclaw, I don't know, maybe this is like synergistic. I don't know if this like is even realistic, but it just seems like the mentality that Holtzclaw wanted the students to have, it was working. All of that energy at the institution was being filtered into like what mattered the most, future generations, right? Yes. Because if we can't keep it going for like posterity, it's pointless, right? Yes. But yeah, I think also Mr. Pickens, he wrote about the work of the young Negroes and how lots of the work that was going on with the schools was young people doing it, like young teachers, like young people who I saw them as sacrificing time, sacrificing money, sacrificing things they probably would have done just for themselves for the greater good of the students who went to the Utica Institute. And I think that's important for us young people today to observe because we can do that too. Yes. We don't have to leave it to the older generations to keep on making everything shake and bake. We can take initiative and we can work together and be successful. And not only for our own gains, for like the gains of the greater good. And I think some of us do that, but more of us can also do that, right? That's right. I think even going off of that note you said earlier about how Holtzclaw talks about getting a lot of help from white people in the town, I think my personal opinions about it, like we can only be better if we're working together. Right. And if we're not working together, it's really impeding progress. Yes. Quite frankly. We could be farther along if we were better along, basically. So like that's kind of like what I think about, like, working with people of different races, backgrounds, creed. Yeah, it's true. When he talked about the writer Pickens talked about the young black folks doing such and such, it was almost as if he were surprised that this was happening. Right. But you're right. Holtzclaw had a clarity of mission and vision, and he was able to inspire and translate that vision so that others could buy into it. And when his young teachers, and I love seeing that it was all these young folks work. I'm wanting and excited when I see that that young folks are picking up the mantle. They are buying into the mission, into the vision, and they are going forward to push that. And these teachers, there was a story in an earlier chapter about D.W.L. Davis, who would go into the community as a blacksmith and then make more money out in the community doing that job than he made as a teacher. But instead of pocketing that money that he made on his off days, he brought that in and gave it to the institution. That selflessness that you mentioned. And not saying that we want people to just be totally selfless and not, feed themselves or anything. But the primary goal being the uplifting of the community and the people,
that needs to come back. And you're right, it does need to be younger folks.
I would consider this person to be a younger person. I heard her say one time, an elder told her, it's like, you're not going to change the world probably during your generation. Like, what you want, how you want to see the world, or how you want the world to be, will likely not be that world, like, during your lifetime. But what we do is, like, we pass the baton. It's like you either can catch the baton and do everything you can do during your lifetime, during your opportunity, and then you pass that baton on to someone else, so it's all about, like, the passing of the baton. Like, everybody's going to have, like, their issues depending on, like, when you're born or whatever, right? And we get to decide whether or not we're going to pick up the baton and do something about it, or not, basically.
Or drop it.
Right. I don't know if I articulated that as clearly as I wanted to, but it's all about the baton passing, right? It's not about seeing exactly what you want to see, like, during your time. It's just, like, doing what you can so it can be better for the future generations.
Next generation. That's true. In chapter 19, he talked about Holtzclaw's struggle. How he came and he was unsuccessful time after time. And instead of throwing up his hands, he kept coming back. And he was eventually successful.
Right.
And started in a normal and industrial school with one teacher and 20 pupils. And he mentions how far away it was from Vardaman. And this was a person who said that Negro tax money would be better spent on schools for white students. And the original site of the school he talks about and how it was moved. He went through all of it. And when you mentioned that he said the young Negroes were ordinarily regarded as appalling problems from the South. But when they are seen in this useful work, you get the idea that if the problem is given an opportunity, it will solve itself. Now, I took exception with the word problem. Further, it quotes from other writers in the book. They talk about the Negro problem. And I'm like, really, I don't want to go here with you. But if you think about us working together to solve our issues, which is a euphemism for problem, I know. But as you said, it's us working together. And if we can incorporate allies to assist us with this, that's great. But the core work needs to be done by us so we see the success and so we value it. And we can pass that intrinsic value on forward. I talk about all the time, and I know you've heard me. When I came to Utica, I didn't know anything, but it was the people who were here doing the work that I was able to see and talk to that inspired me to want to take part in it. I wanted to have a part in what was going on. Talking to the students and the newer faculty became one of the things I wanted to do. Buy in, see what's going on here. This is an important place. Yes, it's at the edge corner of nowhere, but there's a lot going on, and all roads lead here. It led you here. It leads others here, and this is something that I firmly believe. I firmly believe that.
I can relate, Ms. Green, about how you observe people and, you wanted to be a part of that. I feel like I had a similar experience. And you're one of those people who I feel has welcomed me and makes me feel, she's like clutching her pearls, y'all. One of those people who makes me feel like welcome here, Auntie Ms. Green.
Auntie Ms. Green. I'll take that.
Ms. Green, you also made me think about something else when you were talking about the younger generations. It made me think about what you just referred to, the 60s and the 70s, because if we go back and look at those people who were considered quote-unquote agitators,
yes,
or the people who were leading the charge on some of the activism, those were young people.
That's right.
Quite frankly, like SNCC, those were like college students.
Yes.
I'm from Alabama, so looking at Birmingham, all of those kids who were hosed down, those were children.
Right.
So the young people have more power than they may realize sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I really think that needs to be really emphasized to young folks, because sometimes here we go. I remember when we didn't have the right to vote and they were sending off young men to fight in Vietnam and die at 18. And they couldn't vote until they were like 21, 20 something. And when they lowered the age for voting to 18, I was right up there to register to vote so I could exercise that right. And millions of us did. And I haven't missed a voting opportunity since then. Mm-hmm. So we're talking from 1972 until now. Mm-hmm. And I talk to young folks, or I talk to people that are just a little bit younger than me. Not much younger than me, but a little bit younger than me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, you know, this is going on, and we need to make sure we get out and exercise our right to vote. And I'll hear, well, that ain't going to matter no way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, it does. Yours doesn't matter. This one, if you take a bunch of y'all that didn't matter and pull it together, it really matters.
Exactly.
So when we look at what Holtzclaw was doing, and it was a poor area, and those little pennies that folks were giving to him, that was all they had, oh, that shouldn't matter. But if you pull them together, it does matter.
Exactly.
So it's, as you said earlier, it's recognizing the power you have.
Right.
And being ready to exercise that.
Right.
And it doesn't always mean that it's a negative protest or it's a negative outcome.
Right.
Sometimes we think of exercising your power as negative.
Right.
And it's not.
Right.
Not that long ago, a young black woman couldn't be a director. Mm-hmm. Sure couldn't be a documentary. Not openly and going out and being welcomed into different areas. Couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. A woman couldn't do much of anything without permission. You would have had to have your daddy's permission and all kinds of stuff. So the freedoms that young people have, young women have, young women of color have to fight for every day. Those fights are less about being in the space sometimes as being to exercise your voice in the space. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can be in the space, but you're going to have to be quiet.
Exactly.
Where before you couldn't even be in the space and learn about it.
Right.
So I know that sounds a little convoluted, but do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's just making me think about the baton analogy I was trying to make up earlier, because somebody had to get in the room initially, right? Yes. And then other of us could follow, right? Yes. I've been working in the documentary film industry for almost 10 years now. Yes. And now since I'm directing this documentary on Utica, it will be my directorial debut. And I had a moment one day, I realized oh wow, I'm the next generation of black women documentary film directors, right? And so I was thinking about this as I was reaching out to who I would consider big sister, black women documentary film directors and mentors. And I'm like, wow, I'm the next generation. But I have these opportunities because other people came before me, right? And then I have to be cognizant of what I'm doing with my opportunities for people who are coming behind me, right? Yes. Which goes again to young people, people even younger than me. It's important. Even when I'm in Utica, I see kids around. I was like, hey, you like cameras? Trying to get more kids interested in the camera. Yeah. And lots of times they naturally are interested in it because it's something unique, I guess. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they'll catch on to it, and then they'll be better than me. You know what I mean? They'll be a better filmmaker than me. And then they can give other people, where they come from, opportunities, right? Yeah.
It's a difference between opening a door to let other people through and being a gatekeeper to shut that door in their face.
Miss Green.
Did I say something? What did I say?
I felt it was something there. That might have ruffled a few feathers.
Well, they'll be all right when the swelling goes down. But it's true. Sometimes we are so focused on us being the only one in the room and so proud of that we keep other folks from coming through. That's something Holtzclaw didn't do.
Right.
He did not do that.
And it didn't make sense to him.
It didn't. And he was opening the door and pulling folks through and opening the door and providing opportunity. He came down here and showed by example. So I cannot overemphasize what people say in their churches all the time. The only Bible somebody will read is your life. Mm-hmm. So he took his life, and instead of preaching the gospel of Tuskegee, he showed it to them. Mm-hmm. And then he pulled those people. He brought these Tuskegee graduates with him who already had been inspired and knew. And then they expanded that. Mm-hmm. To go out into the community and show by the example of your life This is what it looks like to have an education. This is what it looks like to build your own house. This is what it looks like to build your own home. What you just said a few minutes ago about talking to the younger folks here about, do you like a camera? Do you want to do this? Mm-hmm. But what they're seeing is not someone who is showing them a picture of a camera and saying, do you like this? Do you want to do this? They're seeing a young woman who is holding her camera and operating it, and they can see what it would look like for someone who looks like them to do it.
Right.
Holtzclaw was showing folks what education looked like on a Black person. Mm-hmm. What owning a house looked like on a Black person. Mm-hmm. Then it's easier to imagine that for yourself.
Right.
Because you had to see somebody who was doing it.
Yep. I feel like I'm a part of what they call the Oprah generation, if I'm being honest. Because I did go to school for journalism, mm-hmm. but seeing Oprah on TV, because my mother used to watch it on TV, mm-hmm. the Oprah Winfrey Show, like seeing her on TV meant something, I think, just naturally because she was a woman and a Black woman, mm-hmm. but then also learning that she was from the South, mm-hmm. and she was doing this, like that was really the thing that went off in my brain, that, oh, I can do anything mm-hmm. that my little brain can imagine.
I don't have to be from New York.
Exactly. Like, I can be from Alabama, and I can be like what I feel like on the inside. I really can be, right? Mm-hmm. So that Southern connection is something that really made it click in my brain that I really could be whatever I could imagine. And then also, like, my family is very supportive too. Yeah, and my parents always tell me I could be whatever I wanted to be. But it goes on what you were saying, Ms. Green, about like seeing something, it's easy for you to believe something.
Mm-hmm. Let's just take sip culture. Mm-hmm. Carlton and Brandy, right? Mm-hmm. They're the living example of what a nonprofit can do, mm-hmm. right? And so when they started, I was like, well, really? What are they going to do? Let's see what that's going to look like. And that's what folks were doing with Holtzclaw.
Right.
All right, you came to town. We just had somebody through here trying to start a school, and he took our money and left. What you going to do? Mm-hmm. And over the years, they watched, but they were seeing it. Mm-hmm. They weren't just hearing it. And they saw the struggles when the tornadoes came through and tore the buildings down and they rebuilt them.
Right.
Or they needed to move the school and they were trying to raise the money and how hard it was. And then someone offers them the land, and when they get ready to buy it, they say, no, you ain't having this. Mm-hmm. And didn't stop. They went forward and forward and forward. It's perseverance.
Right.
When we are, you, Sip, me, when we are faced with stumbling blocks, doesn't mean you won't stumble.
Right.
Doesn't mean you won't fall. Mm-hmm. But when you get up,
you're stronger.
You
better.
have to get up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And not to, dust yourself off and say, okay, that's one way that it didn't work. Mm-hmm. Let me try this.
Right.
Holtzclaw coming to Mississippi 3 times. And each time being met with, not here.
Right. But he didn't quit.
Yeah.
He did not quit. Even
when he got close, somebody gave him a book that mm-hmm. reignited him, and he came back. Mm-hmm. So as I'm looking around the world today, and I see folks stumble and they fall and they lay there, I'm like, no, get up.
Right.
It hurts. There are times when you want to just go, no, that's it, I'm tapping out. But you don't, because there are people who are looking at you to see what it's like to get up and go on. Mm-hmm. And that inspires them, especially in this day, to get up and go on.
Right.
So here we are.
And you never know, 100 years later, we could be talking about your life. Just like we're talking about Holtzclaw. Yeah. It's like you just never, like he never imagined that there would be this Utica Institute Museum.
No.
Ms. Green. Like he never imagined like so many things. He was just doing what he felt like he should be doing with his time here on Earth.
That's true.
And I hope we all can at least do a little bit of that, right? Because we really truly never understand like the impact of like what you said, how we choose to live our lives.
Yes.
Right? So it's important. I think it's important.
It is important to not get drowned in what did I call it one time? Vanity projects. Mm-hmm. Wanting to do something that lives on past you. And I'm gonna take this one little moment to actually talk about the Black Man's Burden podcast project. Initially, it was started to have an audio book to help students who don't read as fluently. Mm-hmm. And so that when we assign them the book to read and we discuss it, that they would have something to, all different kind of learners, they would have something auditory that they could have with the book. Because sometimes you need a little bit of extra help. So the initial idea was to create that so that students would then have that they could listen to. Or if we were trying to inspire the new faculty, they could pop that in on their ride down here from their homes and sort of get a little boost on their way into work. Mm-hmm. And then we thought, podcast? That was not something I anticipated. And then adding the discussion, because what I did not want is for folks just to hear me droning on chapter after chapter after chapter and not having a different perspective on what was being read. Mm-hmm. So when we first started doing those interviews and discussions, I kept learning more about the book each time I had a discussion with someone to get their view on what it was, to do the discussion before the recording and then the discussion after the recording. So it's been really beneficial for me, and I've been immersed in Holtzclaw's message for 24 years now. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate what you are bringing to it and the insights you're showing me, because that's expanding my knowledge of who he was and who he could be. Your Alabama connection really brings home to me how he can inspire folks, not just in Mississippi, not just in Alabama, but in the entire country. Mm-hmm. But moving forward.
Something the same as Green.
Yeah,
you
please,
wanted something in particular.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, so there are a couple of quotes that I highlighted in the book. There's one part in the book where Holtzclaw talks about how the object before him has loomed so large as to eclipse all minor difficulties. Mm-hmm. So even though it was so difficult doing what he felt like he needed to do, he still had that tenacity and that perseverance that we talked about earlier, right? Mm-hmm. But I think my favorite quotes in the entire book, I actually have this on the background on my phone and my laptop.
Okay. What is that?
Let me give you the exact page number.
Okay.
So people can just go right to this when they when they get the book.
Okay. Which page is that?
We are on page 229.
Okay. Let me go there.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is my favorite. This is my favorite quote, and I want to say it now because we were just talking about how we never know how our lives can impact others.
Yes.
And I think this is an inspirational quote. That's how I would describe it. It says, "I have no time to sing minor notes. I have determined that the tune of my life shall be played on major keys." So it's like, time's up for the small stuff, Ms. Green. Time's up for the small stuff. We have to really understand like who we are, who we can be, and go after it. You know, because what do they say? What do they say? Like, if you shoot for the stars, that's fine because at least you'll land like amongst the clouds or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it's like, go big or go home. That's what I say.
Go big or go home. Okay, that's exactly what that sounds like. I hadn't thought of it that way though before. And those two quotes, though one about he didn't want his life on minor keys.
Minor notes.
Mm-hmm. Ah, yes.
I have no time to sing minor notes. No time, because we're only here for a finite amount of time, right? I have determined that the tune of my life shall be played on major keys. I love it. I love it. Every time I read it, I love it. So I had to shout it out on the podcast.
Thank you for doing that. Mm-hmm. That's a quote that when we go back in my office, I'm going to show you that someone gave that to me, and that has been one of the inspirations for doing this work. Mm. Yes. It
resonates with me as well. And I feel like I take that with me on a journey with the documentary because if I'm being honest, like, most people's relationship with filmmaking is like through the television screen, right? But I think if you ask most of us who work in the industry, it's exceptionally taxing, difficult work. It may, for some of us, it can be physically taxing, but like it's also mentally, it can be a lot, like our jobs are not easy. I keep it in proper perspective. Like, we're not performing open heart surgery.
Right.
Like, like saving people's lives in that manner. But the work, it can be very difficult. And especially like when it comes to documentary filmmaking, and then even on top of that, independent documentary filmmaking, it's just, it could be a tedious journey. So like, I use this Holtzclaw and his quotes and things like, making sure I'm not living my life on minor notes, but major keys, those things to keep me going on the process, and
That's
the people
so wonderful.
as well.
That also shows how it doesn't just have to be about the education of Black people. It's about the inspiration of Black people, of all people, but Black people. And you, in an industry that one would not directly associate with Utica, Mississippi and Holtzclaw, drawing inspiration from your Alabama brother, 121 years removed. That says so much to the strength of him and his vision and its ability to transcend time.
Yes.
And I'm just really touched that you gave this example that can then resonate with other folks as well. So thank you for that.
My
thank
pleasure.
You for that.
I think with the inspiration, Miss Green, is also determination.
Okay.
Holtzclaw's determination. And just seeing him be successful with what he set out to do, regardless of like everything that happened. Like similar to some of the stuff that we already discussed. It's like, keep on keeping on, basically.
Keep on keeping on. I want to thank you for joining me today, Jasmine. It has been a pleasure. I have really enjoyed it. Is there anything else you want to add to what we've discussed? I know you've got notes over there. I know there's stuff you want to add.
I think the last thing that I wrote, Miss Green, how Holtzclaw equated freedom with education.
Oh, please, yes.
Because he said something about young people must be educated in order to be set free. Yeah. I think education has been...
Oh, yes. Come on, bring that, because we are in a fight for education in this country for real these days.
Yeah, in so many different ways. I do think education's value has fluctuated over the decades, right? And I think it being for-profit has had a lot to do with that. But I think the education piece is important when it comes to freedom. Similar to what was spoke about earlier in the chapter about how the Black students having Black educators, how that impacted their experience. Yes. I think the words were freedom. It was like freedom of body and soul, right? That's what the writer talked about with the Black students having, the Black teachers, especially of the younger generation. So I think it's about the education, but I think it's about more than the education too. Really, that really helps us set up citizens of our society, right? So that's something else that stood out to me. And I think HBCU stand out to me when I think about that. Now, I didn't go to HBCU for school, but I have so many family members and so many friends who did. It wasn't only about the education. Right. It's more about life, quite frankly, which, is special and it matters.
Seeing that example of an educated person standing in the classroom, sharing that with you, it's something that we know needs to be shown in elementary schools now to see, because so much of the education staff throughout the country is white and female. So to see a brown or Black female, and especially a brown or Black male, is an example to these students of what education can look like and a possibility. So yes, to come to rural Mississippi, not that far from when Reconstruction was beat down, and show all of these people an example of what education could look like for them, and then what the opportunities that education can provide for them, was priceless.
Right.
So yeah, one of the questions I always ask is, what was the relevance? We've already talked about that today. And is Holtzclaw someone that needs to be shared with other people? Oh yeah, for sure. Yes. So again, thank you for coming and helping me close out the book, Black Man's Burden on a High Note, and for sharing your time and your perspective on him and this chapter. I cannot thank you enough. I'm looking forward to see what you do with your inspiration from Holtzclaw. But thank you so much, Jasmine.
Thank you for having me, Miss Green. It's been more than a pleasure. Dreams do come true.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in for Sips from the Sip. This ends Season 1. We have had a great time sharing the story of William Holtzclaw and the little Tuskegee that is Utica Institute with you. After a short hiatus, we will be back to share more stories about little-known people and places in Mississippi. We are busy pulling those episodes together for Season 2. Look for an announcement of release dates soon. This program is supported by donations from our listeners. If you enjoy learning about the history of William Holtzclaw, the Utica Institute, and Mississippi, consider donating. To support Sips from the Sip and all the work of the Utica Institute Museum, visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Utica Institute. Until next time, this has been Jean Green coming to you from the heart of the Sip.